My husband told me his ex passed away last year. I sent flowers to her family. Yesterday, I saw her posting new family photos on Facebook. That's how my story begins. And if you think it sounds like a bad joke, I wish it were. I'm glad you're here. Because I need someone to hear this. Someone who won't immediately tell me I'm crazy. Or that I must have misunderstood something. Because I didn't. I saw her face smiling, alive, holding a toddler in her arms. Let me take you back to where it started. It was a quiet evening in early spring, the kind of day when life feels so ordinary that you barely notice it passing. I was cooking dinner, pasta with too much garlic because that's how Mark liked it. The house smelled warm, cozy. Music hummed from the little speaker by the counter, something easy, the kind of song that made you think of small-town love stories. Nothing in that moment hinted that anything was wrong. We'd been married for 3 years then, together for almost 5, not perfect but stable. Mark was the dependable kind, organized, polite, always on time, the kind of man who keeps his promises. Or at least that's what I believed. He worked as an accountant at a mid-size firm downtown. I taught at a local preschool. Our days were predictable. Early mornings, long commutes, lazy weekends watching reruns and trying new coffee places. We weren't glamorous, but we were solid. Or so I thought. That night, Mark came home later than usual. His face was pale, eyes distant like he was carrying something heavy. I asked if he was okay. He nodded, but his voice cracked a little when he said, I just got some bad news. Emily passed away. Emily, his ex-girlfriend. The one before me, I froze. I didn't know what to say. They'd dated for almost 4 years, broke up a year before he met me. He'd mentioned her a few times, always kindly, never lingering. Just the usual ex stories, nothing bitter. So when he said she'd died, something inside me tightened. Not jealousy, not even sadness, just a strange, hollow shock. Death changes the air in the room. Even when it's about someone you never met. Mark told me she'd had a car accident. Late at night on the highway outside the city. A drunk driver, instant death. He said he'd gotten a message from one of their mutual friends, and that her funeral was happening in a few days. He looked broken. I held him. And for a while, I forgot that she was his ex. She was just a person who died too soon. He didn't go to the funeral. He said he couldn't face it. Said it would feel wrong, like disrespecting me. I told him I understood. But I could tell it haunted him. For weeks afterward, he seemed quieter, more distant. Sometimes I'd catch him scrolling on his phone, eyes glassy, and when I asked, he'd lock the screen too fast. I thought maybe he was looking at old photos. Grieving in private. I didn't push. A month later, I sent flowers, white lilies, to an address he gave me for her parents. I wrote a small card. From someone who knows she was loved. Mark said that was sweet. He even kissed my forehead and whispered, she would have appreciated that. And then life went on. Or pretended to. We bought a new couch. Adopted a cat. Took a trip to the mountains that summer. Little things kept the rhythm steady, like a song that refuses to end. But sometimes, late at night, I'd catch him awake beside me, staring at the ceiling. I'd ask what he was thinking. He'd say, nothing, just tired. And I'd believe him, because that's what love does. It gives people the benefit of the doubt, even when doubt whispers back. The first real crack showed months later. We were out for dinner with friends, and someone mentioned a reunion. Mark's hand froze on his glass for half a second, just long enough for me to notice. He laughed it off, but I saw the color drain from his face when the name Emily floated across the table. One of our friends had gone to college with her, and said something like, "It's so sad what happened." I still can't believe it. Mark just nodded. His jaw tightened, and for the rest of the evening he barely spoke. When we got home, I asked him again, if he was okay. He said yes, but his eyes told another story. Something deeper. Something I didn't understand yet. I remember thinking, maybe grief has no timeline. Maybe he's still processing. And I told myself to be patient. I didn't know it then. But that patience, that trust, would become the weapon he used against me. Because the truth didn't die with Emily. It was alive, hiding in plain sight, waiting for the right moment to claw its way out. And that moment would come. Exactly 1 year later, on an ordinary afternoon, when I opened Facebook just to check my cousin's wedding photos, and instead saw her, Emily, smiling, radiant, standing beside a man I didn't recognize, with a child who looked about 2 years old. The caption read, "Family Day, nothing better, alive, completely alive." My breath stopped. The screen blurred. My mind couldn't process it. I scrolled again, checked the name. The profile picture, the same smile, the same face from Mark's old photos, even the same tattoo on her wrist, a small blue star. I remember whispering out loud, "Oh my God." Then I laughed. Because it was absurd, impossible. People don't just come back from the dead, but she did. And that's when every quiet night, every soft lie, every look he gave me, suddenly made sense, or at least started to. Because if Emily was alive, then my husband, the man who told me she was gone, had buried more than a person. He had buried the truth, and I was about to dig it all up. When I think back to the time before all this, before the lies, before the discovery, I can still picture our house exactly as it was. Small, a little cluttered, but ours. A white 2-story on a quiet street lined with maple trees that turned golden in the fall. We'd picked it because it felt alive, Mark said. He liked the creaky steps and the way the afternoon light hit the living room walls. Our life was simple. Predictable in that comforting way you only appreciate once it's gone. Every morning I'd wake up to the sound of Mark grinding coffee beans in the kitchen. He'd always make mine first, just how I liked it. Too sweet, too much cream. We'd sit on the porch before work, sipping in silence, watching neighbors walk their dogs. I used to think that silence meant peace. Now I know sometimes it's where secrets hide best. I taught preschool at a small community center. I loved it. The chaos, the paint-stained hands, the kids calling me Miss Lila with half their teeth missing. I came home every day smelling like glue sticks and apple juice, and Mark would tease me for it. "My wife, the artist," he'd say, laughing as he kissed the top of my head. He worked longer hours than I did. His office was downtown, 30 minutes away, and he was proud of how steady his job was. Numbers never lied, he used to say. That irony still makes me sick. Evenings were our little rituals. I'd cook. He'd clean. We'd share a bottle of cheap wine and talk about stupid things. How we should start jogging, how our cat, Milo, had probably gained weight. Sometimes we'd plan our future, a bigger house someday, maybe a baby once we were ready. I thought we were building something real, solid. People always say you don't notice cracks until the whole thing starts to crumble. But looking back, I think I did see them. I just refused to believe what they meant. The first one was small, barely a line. It was a Sunday morning, late winter. We were supposed to drive to my parents' for lunch. Mark said he wasn't feeling well, that he had a headache. So I went alone. When I came back that evening, the house smelled faintly of cologne. Not his usual one, the sharp woodsy scent he always wore, but something sweeter, floral almost. I asked about it. He said he'd just tried a sample from the drugstore. I laughed it off. Another time, he left his phone on the couch while he showered. It buzzed with a message from someone named Aaron. The text was harmless, something like, "Call me when you can, man." Still, I noticed the contact photo was blank. No last name, just Aaron. When I asked who it was, Mark shrugged. "Old college buddy." His tone was flat, rehearsed. But then the next day, that message was gone. Deleted. I remember feeling a flicker of unease, like a tiny pinprick under the skin, but I swallowed it. I didn't want to be the suspicious wife. I told myself every couple has private things. It's healthy. And for a while, life went back to normal. We went to dinners with friends, spent lazy Saturdays binge-watching shows neither of us really liked. We even started taking Sunday drives out to the lake again. He'd rest his hand on my thigh the way he used to when we first dated. I thought maybe whatever darkness had passed, but something had changed, subtly, like the air before a storm. Mark began locking his phone more often. He'd take it with him even to the bathroom. He used to leave it charging by the bed, but now it lived in his pocket. When I joked about him hiding state secrets, he laughed, but his eyes didn't match the sound. He started coming home later. Always with the same explanation. End of quarter stuff? Babe, numbers don't balance themselves. I'd nod, kiss his cheek, and serve reheated dinner while he typed on his laptop. At night, I'd turn over in bed listening to him breathe beside me, trying to believe that this quiet distance, was just life settling down, that it wasn't something worse. Still, there were good days. Days when he'd surprise me with coffee in bed or take me out for ice cream after dinner. I clung to those. They made the bad moments feel small, manageable. We'd been married 3 years by then. Our friends called us steady. I believed them. Because when everyone around you thinks your life is perfect, it's easier to ignore the feeling that it's not. The anniversary of Emily's supposed death came and went. Mark didn't mention it. Neither did I. I figured that was how he wanted it, quiet remembrance. I even made his favorite dinner that night, just to be gentle. He thanked me, smiled, but there was an emptiness behind it. That night, while he showered, I found him crying. Not sobbing, just silently, shoulders shaking. I asked what was wrong. He said, "Nothing. It's just been a long day." I believed him. I shouldn't have. Because the truth is, when people hide guilt, it doesn't stay buried. It leaks out. In sighs, in too long pauses, in eyes that won't meet yours. Sometimes when we were lying in bed, he'd say her name in his sleep. Once I heard it clearly, "Emily." I pretended not to. I didn't want to start a fight over dreams. But that sound haunted me. And then, a small, strange thing happened that I didn't understand until much later. We were cleaning out the garage, getting ready for a yard sale. I found an old box of Mark's college stuff, textbooks, a few photos, random junk. On top was a photo album. Inside were pictures of him and Emily, laughing, holding hands on the beach. Normal couple stuff. Except one photo caught my eye. It was taken in front of a cabin with a faded blue door. Behind them, a wooden sign read Riverside Lodge. Mark saw me holding it and froze. He took the album gently, almost too calmly, and said, "Let's throw that one out." I asked why. He said, "Bad memories." But his hands were trembling. He threw the album into the trash bin himself. I remember the sound it made, the dull thud of something heavier than it should have been. That night he couldn't sleep. I couldn't either. We lay there in the dark, backs turned. The silence between us was no longer peaceful. It was suffocating. If I'd been paying closer attention, I would have noticed the pattern, how every time his lie cracked open, he covered it with affection. How he used tenderness as camouflage. But I didn't. I kept loving him. I kept believing that grief made people act strangely. The truth was that grief had nothing to do with it. What I saw as pain was really fear. And soon, I'd find out what he was so afraid of losing. The day it really began didn't look like anything special. It was late March, cool but bright. The kind of morning when life feels calm, routine, predictable. I was grading preschool art projects at the kitchen table, waiting for Mark to get home. He'd said he was grabbing drinks with coworkers, but he texted that he'd be home by 8. 8 came and went. 9 too. At first I didn't mind. People work late. But when the clock hit 10 and I hadn't heard from him again, a dull ache started crawling up my chest. I tried calling. No answer. Texted. Nothing. Then, at 10:37, the door finally opened. Mark stepped in, smelling faintly of beer and something sweeter. Perfume, maybe. His tie was loose, his eyes glassy. I asked, trying to sound casual. "Rough night?" He smiled, a little too easily. You could say that. Something in his tone felt off, rehearsed. Like he'd practiced being relaxed. He kissed my forehead, went straight to the shower. I remember standing there in the kitchen, the clock ticking, watching condensation rise on his half-empty glass of water, thinking, something's shifting. Later, as he slept beside me, I checked his phone. I'd never done it before, not once in 5 years. But that night, something in my gut refused to rest. The screen was locked. I didn't know his new passcode. I used to. It was our wedding date, but now it wasn't. That small fact hit harder than it should have. Why change it? I put the phone back, guilt gnawing at me, but curiosity stronger than shame. The next day, he acted normal. He made breakfast, kissed me goodbye, said he'd see me for dinner. But his phone stayed glued to him, like an extra limb. That week, more little things began to slip. One night, I heard him whispering in the living room after midnight. When I walked in, he jumped, said he was just checking work messages. But the way he shoved the phone into his pocket told another story. Another time, I noticed a receipt sticking out of his jacket. A small local cafe dated 2 days earlier. 2 meals, one coffee listed as almond latte, the other caramel cappuccino. I hate caramel. He knows that. When I asked who he'd been with, he said, client meeting. Except the cafe was nowhere near his office. I let it go. For the moment. But once suspicion takes root, it grows fast. It fills your mind like ivy, wrapping around every thought until even love feels like doubt. A few days later, he left his laptop open while showering. That never happened. I don't even know what I was looking for, but my hand moved on its own. His email inbox was clean. Too clean. All recent messages deleted, except one, buried in the drafts folder, half written. The subject line read, "We have to be careful." The message body was empty. I stared at it for a long time. My pulse was pounding in my ears. Careful about what? Careful with whom? When he came out of the shower, I pretended to be folding laundry. He looked at me, smiled, said, "You okay?" I nodded, but that night, I barely slept. The next morning, I decided to do something I'd never done before. Check his social media. He wasn't a big user, barely posted, but maybe I'd find something. I searched his Facebook first. Nothing unusual. Then I clicked on the friends list. Hundreds of names I didn't know. But one caught my eye, Emily Rose. My blood went cold. It couldn't be. I clicked, expecting an inactive page, maybe an old memorial account. But the profile picture was recent, a candid photo of a woman at a park. Her face turned slightly, sunlight on her cheek, private account. No posts visible. But it said active 3 hours ago. I just stared at the screen, my breath coming shallow. It had to be someone else. Same name, maybe even similar face, but a sick, heavy dread began settling in my chest. That night, I didn't mention it. I couldn't. What would I even say? "Hey, honey, I think your dead ex is updating her Facebook?" Instead, I watched him. His patterns, his reactions. The next few days were like living with a stranger wearing my husband's face. He flinched when his phone buzzed. He smiled at messages he wouldn't show me. He came home smelling faintly of the same perfume again, that sweet floral trace that wasn't mine. One evening, while he was in the shower, I picked up his jacket to hang it. His phone slipped out of the pocket. The screen lit up with a preview, message from E. Can't stop thinking about today. The world stopped spinning. I didn't need to read more, but I did. When he left the room later, I tried again. This time, I noticed the faint smudge of oil from his fingers, the way he typed quickly, nervously. He'd been hiding something for months. That night, while he slept, I tried every passcode I could think of. Birthdays, anniversaries, his parents' dates. Nothing worked. Then I remembered something small. The blue star tattoo Emily had on her wrist. He'd once mentioned it when telling an old story. I typed in 0423, the date he said she got it, unlocked. My hands shook. His messages were like knives. There were dozens from E, conversations about meeting at a cabin, same place as before, about keeping things quiet, about how much she missed him, and then one photo, A blurry selfie. Her face, alive, smiling, unmistakable. Emily, the woman who'd supposedly died. I remember the moment my body realized it before my mind did. My chest tightened. My stomach dropped. I couldn't breathe. My husband wasn't grieving her. He was still with her, and worse, he'd told me she was dead. I sat there, shaking, staring at the phone, at the messages that shattered everything I thought I knew. The betrayal wasn't just infidelity. It was insanity. A lie so deep it distorted reality itself, because if she was alive and he knew it, what else was he capable of hiding? I put the phone back where I found it. My hands felt numb. He stirred in his sleep and whispered, "Lila?" I froze, then softly answered, "Yeah?" He mumbled something I couldn't catch. Then silence. I lay awake till sunrise, watching him, wondering who this man beside me really was. In the morning, I smiled like nothing happened, packed his lunch, kissed his cheek, told him to have a good day. He smiled back, unaware that the ground beneath his lies was beginning to crack. Because now, I wasn't just suspicious. I was certain, and I needed proof. You know that moment when your stomach drops, and your mind just detaches? That was me the next morning, still functioning, still moving, but on autopilot. I went to work, smiled at kids, read stories, painted suns and clouds with them. But my body was somewhere else. My mind was replaying those messages over and over. Same place as before. Can't stop thinking about today. The words looped like a song I couldn't turn off. When I got home that evening, the house felt different. It wasn't mine anymore. It was his, a stage where he'd performed every lie. I looked around and realized every corner held a secret I hadn't noticed. The hardest part was pretending. Pretending I didn't know. Pretending I didn't want to scream. Mark came home later than usual again, humming like nothing was wrong. He kissed me, asked about my day, scrolled through his phone while I told him about the kids making paper butterflies. And I just stared at him, this man I thought I knew, and thought, how do you look someone in the eyes after they've killed the truth? That night, I decided to stop guessing. I needed evidence. Something undeniable. The first thing I did was message Emily. I used an old account I hadn't touched in years, with my maiden name, no photo. Just a simple message. "Hi, I think we might have a mutual friend. Mark L." I stared at the screen for hours. No reply. The next day I checked again. Still nothing. But I noticed something new on her profile. A new post. A picture of that same little boy, the one I'd seen before, holding a blue balloon. Caption, "Daddy's favorite color." My hands went ice cold. I clicked her About section. There it was. Relationship status. In a relationship. With no name listed. But the most chilling part? She lived 15 minutes away. Not across the country. Not even in another city. 15 minutes. For months, I'd been sleeping beside a man who spent his days, and some nights, a few streets away with another family. I needed to know how long it had been going on. So I dug deeper. I found an old password of his written in a notebook for a cloud storage account he used to back up photos. When I logged in, I expected spreadsheets, maybe work files. Instead, I found an album called Riverside. I clicked, dozens of photos loaded, him and Emily, smiling, kissing, cooking together. And in the background, that same cabin from the photo I'd found earlier. Riverside Lodge, the place he'd told me was bad memories, but these weren't old. They were recent. Timestamps showed dates from just weeks ago. There was one photo that broke me. Mark holding that same toddler, the boy from her Facebook, both of them laughing. Mark's arm around Emily, the boy's face pressed to his chest. The caption, written in his handwriting, "Family." I couldn't breathe. I slammed the laptop shut. Every cell in my body screamed, it's real. It's all real. He hadn't just lied about her death. He'd built a second life, and the flowers I'd sent to her parents. He must have given me a fake address. The grief, the tears, the quiet nights he'd spent mourning. It was all performance. He'd made me his alibi. For hours, I sat there shaking, staring at nothing. My mind tried to piece together the timeline, but it didn't matter anymore. The truth was too big, too heavy. At one point, I heard Milo, our cat, jump onto the counter and meow softly. It snapped me back. I realized the world was still turning, even as mine had collapsed. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't even try. I watched the sunrise through the blinds and made a decision. I needed to see it. I needed to see him with my own eyes, with her, alive. So I waited for the weekend. Saturday morning, Mark said he was going to meet a client out by the lake. That lake, the one near Riverside Lodge. I just smiled and said, "Drive safe." As soon as he left, I followed. It felt surreal, driving behind him like a stranger, staying far enough back to not be noticed. He turned off the main road onto a gravel path. I parked by the trees and watched. He got out of the car, wearing that same light blue shirt I'd bought him for his birthday. And then she appeared, Emily, alive, real, walking straight toward him. They hugged, not awkwardly, not like old friends, but like two people who still knew every inch of each other. He kissed her forehead, whispered something that made her laugh. Then a little boy ran out of the cabin. Mark lifted him up, spinning him around. I remember the sound of my heart pounding in my ears. It wasn't anger yet. It was disbelief. Pure, numbing disbelief. They looked so normal, so domestic, like a picture out of someone else's life. And maybe it was. Maybe I was the outsider all along. I watched them for 10 minutes, maybe longer, I don't even know. Then I drove away. I pulled over halfway home and threw up on the side of the road. My whole body shook because the truth had a shape now. It wasn't just suspicion or imagination. It was a man holding a child that wasn't mine. It was a woman he swore was dead, laughing in the sun. When I finally got home, I sat on the kitchen floor, clutching Milo, staring at the wall. My brain kept replaying the same thought. He didn't just lie. He erased reality. All those nights of late work, all those mornings he left early, for meetings. He'd been living two lives, walking between them like a ghost. And the worst part? He'd made me his witness. He wanted me to see the good man, the grieving husband. He wanted me to feel lucky. I wasn't lucky. I was chosen because I was easy to fool. That night, I sat at my desk and wrote everything down. Every date, every receipt, every memory. I needed to see it in black and white to prove to myself it wasn't just a nightmare. Then when Mark came home, I smiled. I asked how his client meeting went. He said, "Fine, long day," and I believed him. On the surface, but inside, something new had taken root. Not pain, not even rage yet. Just silence. Cold, sharp silence, because now I knew. And he didn't know that I knew. That was power. A small one maybe, but enough. I didn't confront him. Not yet. I wanted him to keep lying, to see how far he'd go, how deep the hole was. Because soon, I'd make him fall into it himself. When people talk about heartbreak, they always describe the crying first, the screaming, the begging, the collapse. But mine came in silence. A cold, controlled silence that wrapped around me like armor. The night after I followed him, I sat awake until dawn, watching him sleep beside me. The same man who'd kissed his other life goodbye just hours before climbing into bed with me. The same man who whispered, "I love you," with someone else's perfume still clinging to his shirt. I didn't cry. Not yet. Tears felt useless. Instead, my brain went into overdrive, building plans where feelings should have been. I knew one thing. If I confronted him now, he'd lie. He was too good at it. He'd twist everything, make me question what I saw. He'd already made me believe a living woman was dead. That's a special kind of manipulation, one that doesn't deserve forgiveness. So, I made myself a promise. I wouldn't scream. I wouldn't beg. I would end it, but on my terms. The first step was to gather everything. Every piece of evidence, every date, every receipt, every message. If he was capable of lying this deeply, I needed more than just a story. I needed proof strong enough to burn down his entire illusion. Over the next week, I became someone I didn't recognize, patient, methodical, almost clinical. While he slept, I copied his messages. While he showered, I photographed receipts, downloaded backups, traced call logs. I wasn't just his wife anymore. I was his shadow he didn't notice. He was too comfortable, too sure I'd stay quiet. He thought I was still the gentle version of me, the one who believed his headaches and long meetings, but that version of me was gone. I spent nights writing everything down in a notebook, labeled, dated, indexed. It was like building a case. And in a way, I was not for court maybe, but for closure, for the truth. In the margins of that notebook, I started to ask myself questions. Why did he lie about her death? What did he gain by keeping both of us? Who knew the truth besides them? And the one question that made my stomach twist, was that child his? The answer came sooner than I expected. One evening, while Mark was in the shower, his phone pinged. A message from Emily. He said his first word today, Dada. Wish you were here. My blood ran cold. There it was. Confirmation. The boy was his son. I felt a sharp physical ache in my chest, a pain so deep it almost made me laugh. I'd been trying to get pregnant for a year. We'd been to the doctor, done the tests. He said maybe it wasn't meant to happen yet. He told me, we've got time. All that time, he already had a child. That realization cracked something inside me, but it also made me stronger. I wasn't the helpless wife anymore. I was the only person in this triangle who didn't know the rules, and that was about to change. I started small. I made copies of everything, photos, emails, bank statements. I even created a secret email account and uploaded everything there, in case something happened. Then, I began to test him. I told him my mom wanted to visit for the weekend. He said he'd be on a business trip. When I checked, his calendar at work showed vacation days. I told him my car broke down near Riverside. He looked startled, almost afraid before covering it with a smile. Why were you out there? Gotcha. The lies were like threads. Once you tugged on one, the whole fabric came undone. And slowly, piece by piece, I started planning his unraveling. I didn't want revenge for revenge's sake. I wanted him to feel what he'd made me feel, powerless, confused, small. I wanted to flip the mirror and let him see the monster he'd become. The first step was exposure. But not loud, not messy. He deserved something quieter, colder, something that would rot from the inside out. So I waited. 2 weeks later, he said he had another client meeting on a Saturday. I smiled, handed him his coffee, and said, "You're working too hard." He kissed my forehead. I watched him leave and followed again. Same route, same gravel road. But this time I didn't just watch. I parked further back, waited until he went inside the cabin, then quietly walked closer. My hands were shaking, but not from fear, from anticipation. Through the window, I saw them, the three of them, sitting at the table, laughing. Mark cut the boys' food, kissed Emily's cheek. A perfect little family. I took photos, dozens, enough to turn the fantasy into evidence. Then I left. That night, when he came home, he found me sitting at the table with a candle lit and 2 glasses of wine poured. He looked surprised but pleased. "Special occasion?" he asked. "Something like that," I said. "Sit." He smiled, sat down, and started talking. Small talk, stories from work, meaningless filler. I watched him closely, memorizing every twitch of his jaw, every flicker of his eyes. Then I slid my phone across the table. On the screen, the photo of him, Emily, and the boy. He froze. For a second, his face went blank. Not shocked, not even ashamed. Just empty. Then he whispered, "Lila, I can explain." I leaned forward. "No," I said softly. "You can't. Not anymore." I didn't yell. I didn't throw the glass. I just watched him, letting the silence fill every inch of the room. He tried again. "It's complicated," Is it? I cut him off. Because from here it looks very simple. You lied about a woman's death. You made me grieve her. You let me send flowers to your other life. You lied about a child who's yours. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. I saw it, the panic, the shame, the dawning realization that this time he couldn't spin the story. I stood up. I'm not staying in a house built on funerals and fairy tales. He reached for my hand. I pulled away. Then I told him something I hadn't planned to say until later. I know everything, Mark. Every message. Every photo. Every receipt. I've got it all backed up. His face turned white. What do you want? He asked quietly, and that was the moment the power shifted. I smiled. I don't know yet, I said, but you'll find out soon enough. He stared at me, completely still, and for the first time I saw fear in his eyes, not guilt, not sorrow, fear. It felt better than any scream ever could. That night, I packed a bag and left. I didn't tell him where I was going. He called. I didn't answer. He texted. I didn't reply. He was finally the one in the dark. And as I drove away from that house, that fake home, I realized something. Revenge doesn't always start with anger. Sometimes it starts with calm, with silence, with the certainty that the storm is coming. And you're the one holding the match. I left the house that night with one small suitcase and a flash drive in my pocket. The same one holding every secret he thought was safe. I didn't know exactly what my next move would be, but I knew one thing. I wasn't going to hide anymore. For the first time in months, I slept without pretending. And in the quiet of that rented apartment, something inside me finally clicked into place. He'd built a lie so elaborate it felt untouchable. Now I was going to make it collapse, piece by piece, until there was nothing left standing. The next morning, I went to the office where he worked. The receptionist greeted me like always, cheerful, polite. I asked if Mark was in. She smiled. He's out today, family emergency, family. I almost laughed. I left a sealed envelope with her, addressed to Human Resources. Inside were printouts, screenshots, messages, photos, and a letter describing how Mark had falsified reports to cover his trips and client meetings. He hadn't just lied to me, he'd used company money for his weekend, getaways. I didn't need to ruin his job to feel better. But justice, I realized, has layers. If he'd used his position to fund his double life, he deserved to answer for it. Then I drove to the cabin. I parked far enough away to stay unseen. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it. Emily's car was there, a silver SUV, and Mark's parked right beside it. I didn't need to see them again. This time I wasn't here to spy. I was here to end it. I texted him one line. Check your email. Then I hit send on a timed email I'd prepared the night before, addressed to him, to Emily, and to both their families. It contained everything. Every lie, every date, every image. It wasn't revenge anymore. It was exposure. 5 minutes later, I watched through the window as Mark came running outside, phone in hand, shouting something. Emily followed, eyes wide. They argued, her face pale, his voice breaking. I couldn't hear the words, but I didn't need to. I knew what they were: panic, blame, disbelief. I turned the key in the ignition and drove away. Later that afternoon, my phone started vibrating nonstop. Calls, texts, emails, from Mark. Please talk to me. You've ruined everything. It's not what it looks like. And then, from a number I didn't recognize. I didn't know he told you I was dead. I'm sorry. Emily, I read it once, twice, 3 times. Then I deleted it. I didn't need her apology. She'd known he was married. She'd played her part. By evening, it was chaos. Mutual friends texted me, confused, shocked. His parents called, asking if it was true. His office suspended him pending investigation. The double life he'd built so carefully was crumbling. And all I had to do was tell the truth. That night, he showed up at my apartment. I didn't open the door, but I could hear him through it. His voice was raw, desperate. Lila, please. I made a mistake. I didn't know how to tell you. I didn't want to lose you. I stood on the other side of the wood, shaking. You lost me a long time ago, I said quietly. He hit the door once with his hand. Not hard, just enough to make the frame shake. Then silence. When I finally looked through the peephole, he was gone. For the next few days, I barely spoke to anyone. I turned off my phone. I needed space. From him, from the noise, from the endless questions people had. But word travels fast in small towns. People whispered. Some pitied me, some judged me. But none of that mattered. What mattered was that he couldn't hide anymore. Not behind work, not behind lies, not behind me. I found out later that Emily left him too. Apparently, she'd believed every lie he told her. About me, about our marriage, about how we were done. When she saw the truth in that email thread, she packed up and left the cabin. Good. Let them both feel the emptiness they created. The final piece came a week later. I met with a lawyer. I handed over everything. The photos, the financial proof, the messages. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about closure. The divorce papers were filed that same afternoon. When the lawyer asked if I wanted to seek damages, I said no. I didn't want his money. I wanted his peace of mind. Gone. That night, I finally allowed myself to cry. Not for him. For me. For the version of myself who believed that love was safety, that trust was unbreakable. For the woman who sent flowers to a ghost because her husband told her to. The sobs came hard, shaking, ugly. But they felt clean. Like washing poison out of a wound. When they stopped, I felt lighter. Not healed, not yet, but freer than I'd been in years. I made tea, sat by the window, and watched the city lights flicker. Somewhere out there, he was alone. And for the first time, I didn't care where, because the truth had finally caught up to him, and I didn't have to chase it anymore. The next morning, I woke up before dawn. No pounding heart, no anxiety. Just quiet, the kind that doesn't hide anything anymore. I looked at the reflection in the mirror. Puffy eyes, messy hair, but something new behind them. Strength. I whispered to my own reflection. You did it, and I meant it, because sometimes justice isn't loud. Sometimes it's not dramatic or cinematic. Sometimes it's a woman calmly watching the man who broke her finally face the truth, and realizing she doesn't need to look back. The week after the storm felt unreal. The air itself seemed different. Too still, too quiet. As if the world was holding its breath after everything had fallen apart. When you spend years building a life around someone, the silence they leave behind is deafening. I'd wake up expecting to hear the sound of Mark grinding coffee beans in the kitchen. But the mornings were empty now. No footsteps, no half-asleep humming, no smell of burnt toast. At first, the emptiness hurt. Then, slowly, it started to feel like space. Space to breathe. Space to think. Space to exist without pretending. I stayed in that small apartment for a while. It was barely furnished. Just a bed, a thrift store table, a chair, and my cat, Milo, who seemed more at peace than I'd seen him in months. It wasn't home yet, but it was safe. And that was enough. The first few days, I did nothing but rest. My body felt heavy, like it had been holding up a building for years and finally let it crash. I slept late, ate little, and watched the kind of TV that doesn't require thought. Cooking shows, nature documentaries, old comedies with canned laughter. People kept calling. My parents, my friends, co-workers, everyone wanted the story. I ignored most of them. How do you explain that your husband lied about a death? That you were living inside someone else's script? There aren't words for that kind of betrayal that makes sense out loud. Eventually, I called my mom. She cried when I told her. Not out of shock, she said she'd felt something was wrong for months, but out of relief that I was finally free. She asked if I hated him. I said I didn't know, and that was the truth, because hate still meant he had space in my heart. And I wanted him gone, completely. A few days later, I packed up my things from the old house. Mark wasn't there. He'd already moved out, leaving behind a few boxes, a half-empty bottle of whiskey, and a letter. The letter said, "I never meant for it to go this far. I thought I could keep both worlds separate. I loved you both in different ways. I'm sorry." I read it once and folded it neatly back into the envelope. Then I threw it in the trash. Because there are some apologies that don't belong anywhere near your heart. While I packed, I found traces of my old life everywhere. His jacket still hanging by the door, our wedding photo on the nightstand, the jar of sand from our honeymoon beach. For a second, I almost felt nostalgic. Then I remembered how easily he'd looked me in the eyes and lied. I left most of it behind. Objects can keep ghosts, and I didn't want any. Back at the apartment, I began rebuilding tiny things first. Routine. Breakfast at a cafe instead of our kitchen. Evening walks with Milo on a leash that made strangers smile. Relearning how to cook for one. It was strange, the quiet, but it became a kind of peace. I started journaling again. Not about him, about me. What I liked, what I missed, what I wanted next. At first, I didn't know how to fill the pages without his name, but soon, the ink flowed easier. It turns out that healing doesn't look like fireworks. It's not dramatic. It's small and slow. It's brushing your teeth without crying. It's sleeping through the night. It's laughing at something silly and realizing the sound didn't come out forced. 2 months later, I got a letter from the lawyer. The divorce was finalized. Official. Done. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the papers, waiting to feel something. Sadness, relief, anything. But all I felt was calm. The kind of calm that comes after a long storm, when you finally realize it's over and the air smells like rain and soil instead of smoke. I made tea. Milo jumped onto the counter, purring. I whispered to him, "We did it." And for the first time, the future didn't feel terrifying. It felt open. A few weeks after that, I started therapy. I didn't go to talk about Mark. I went to talk about me. About how I lost myself in loving someone who only existed halfway. My therapist told me something that stuck. When someone builds a life on lies, they have to live inside them. You were just visiting. That's why you got out. That sentence changed everything for me, because it made me realize I wasn't broken. I was just done renting space in his delusion. Sometimes people ask if I'd ever forgive him. The answer surprises them. Yes, I already have, not because he deserves it. But because I do, forgiveness isn't letting him off the hook. It's unhooking myself from the past. It's saying, you don't get to live in my mind anymore. 6 months later, I drove back to that lake, the one near Riverside Lodge. It was early morning, mist still rising off the water. I parked by the edge, stepped out, and breathed. The cabin was empty now, sold to someone else. The sign was gone. The world had moved on. I sat on a rock by the shore and closed my eyes. The sound of the water felt like a heartbeat. Not his, mine. For the first time, I didn't feel like the woman he lied to. I felt like the woman who survived it. That night, back home, I deleted the last photo I had of him. Not out of anger, but out of peace. Because the story wasn't his anymore. It was mine. And the woman who once believed her husband's dead ex was real. She was gone too. In her place was someone wiser. Someone calmer. Someone finally free. I didn't need closure from him. I already had it. It's strange, telling this story out loud. Even now, my voice shakes a little when I reach the end. Not because I'm still angry, I'm not, but because saying it all out loud makes it real. It reminds me that I lived through it, that I came out the other side still breathing. When I first found out the truth, that my husband's dead ex was alive, that he had a child with her, that my life had been a cover for his, I thought it would destroy me. And in a way it did, but destruction isn't always the end. Sometimes it's just the beginning of who you really are. I used to think love meant loyalty, no matter what. That if you kept forgiving, kept believing, kept holding on, it would all work out. But now I know that love without honesty isn't love. It's theater. And I was the audience clapping for an illusion. I remember reading somewhere that lies don't kill love. They just starve it slowly until it collapses. That's what happened to us. He didn't just lie to me about another woman. He lied to me about the world itself, about life and death, about trust, about who he really was. And I spent too long thinking it was my fault. That maybe I'd missed something, that maybe I wasn't enough. But here's what I learned. When someone is committed to deceiving you, there's nothing you could have done differently. Their betrayal isn't a reflection of your worth. It's a reflection of their emptiness. I've rebuilt my life since then. Quietly, slowly, carefully. I go to therapy. I've started painting again. Not for anyone else, just for me. Sometimes I use the same colors that filled our old home. The soft yellows, the muted blues. But they feel different now. They don't remind me of him anymore. They remind me of who I was before him. I still wear my wedding ring sometimes, not on my hand, but on a chain around my neck. Not because I miss him, but because it reminds me of the woman who believed in forever. She wasn't naive. She was kind. And she deserves to be remembered too. Sometimes people ask me what I'd say to him if I saw him again. Honestly, I'd just say, thank you. Thank you for showing me how strong I am. Thank you for teaching me that peace is better than promises. Thank you for making me lose everything, so I could finally find myself. It's been over a year now. I don't check his social media anymore. I don't wonder what he's doing or who he's lying to next. That part of my story is over. And the woman who lived it, me, is still here. I still believe in love. But now I know it's not supposed to hurt. It's not supposed to make you doubt your sanity. Love, real love, is calm. It's quiet. It's honest. If you're listening to this and you've been through something similar, if you've ever loved someone who made you question what's real, I want you to hear me. You are not crazy. You are not weak. You are not unlovable. You were just loving someone who wasn't capable of loving you back the same way. And that's not your failure. That's your freedom waiting to happen. Sometimes the story that breaks you is the one that saves you. Because when the walls finally fall, when all the lies collapse, you get to see the world clearly again, and you realize it's still full of light. These days, I sit by that same lake on weekends. I watch families walk by, kids laughing, couples holding hands. And instead of pain, I feel peace. Because I know what I survived. And I know I'll never let someone write my story for me again. I still talk to the camera sometimes, the way I'm talking to you now. Because maybe someone out there needs to hear this before they start doubting themselves the way I did. If that's you, if something deep down feels wrong, even when you can't prove it, listen to that voice. It's not paranoia. It's your intuition trying to keep you safe. Don't silence it to keep someone else comfortable. So that's my story. I thought I was losing everything when I learned the truth. But really, I was getting my life back. Piece by piece, day by day. And if there's one thing I've learned through all of this, it's that truth always wins. It may take time. It may break your heart. But it will set you free in ways lies never could. Did you like my story? Please like and subscribe and tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I want to know how far this story of mine travels. Because somewhere out there, maybe someone's hearing this at 2 a.m. Someone who feels trapped, or lost, or unsure what's real. And if that's you, I want you to remember one last thing. You can rebuild from anything. Even from the ashes of a life you thought was yours. Especially from those ashes, because that's where the truest version of you begins. Right there, in the quiet, after the lies are gone.